Um, Thanks so much for joining. My name is Brady. I'm a product marketing manager here at Hedera Hashgraph, and this is our monthly Hedera Engineering Insights webinar where we get to share a little bit about what's coming down the line at Hedera, new development features, new processes in place for the developer community, and anything else along those lines. Today we're going to be joined by Sam Wood, who is CTO and co-founder of Luther Systems. Luther Systems is a Hedera systems integrator and a prominent member of the Hedera developer community. They've helped out on projects like Toko by DLA Piper, which you can learn a little bit about on the users page of hedera.com. We're also joined by Simi Hunjan and Ken Anderson, both developer evangelists at Hedera Hashgraph, and Donald Thibeau, who is Director of Product Management. And in combination, they're all going to be sharing with everyone today information about the Hedera Improvement Proposals process, which has become more robust over time. We have more processes in place to allow the community to start contributing. An example HIP that was submitted by Sam Wood of Luther Systems and showing how that process has gone. There's also new documentation performing atomic swaps on Hedera that Simi is going to dive into and provide some code examples. As always, there's going to be a live question and answer at the end. So drop your questions into the Q&A box specifically, not the chat, within the Zoom platform. And we'll be sure to answer all of your questions to the best of our abilities. If we can't, we'll follow up afterwards with more information. And with that, I'm going to pass things over to Donald Thibeau.
Thank you, Brady. Good morning, good afternoon, good middle of the day, wherever you may be. It's good to talk with you all today and dive into what we're going to be seeing in an upcoming release of the Hedera mainnet, and then really dive into the Hedera improvement proposal process, as Brady mentioned. So with that, I'll just go over some of our standard updates for this upcoming release targeted at the beginning of May. This release will be 0.13.0. And there's going to be a lot of new exciting features, particularly centered around something called scheduled transactions. We've already received an incredible amount of support and engagement and feedback from the developer community to help make this really the best version of itself that it can be. So scheduled transactions will enable a set of multi-signers on a transaction to schedule that transaction for a future date. Or to trigger the transaction once it is signed by all participants. So we're really excited to see how this use case can be used in everything from minting of tokens to decentralized bridges, and even, I'm sure, a whole set of use cases that I'm not yet aware of. We're also going to probably be updating and adding some fields to the address book files. That's something you can see being discussed in our Hedera services repo on what those fields will be, and something that we'll be communicating out to our developer community once that template is finalized, and so that you can get anything updated on your end. We don't expect it to be a breaking change, really just something to help clean up the formatting of that address book. In addition to that, we've also had a latest release of the Hedera mirror node. So again, including support for things like scheduled transactions, as well as a few other monitor improvements that you as either a mirror node operator or mirror node user can use to make sure to support that latest set of features in 0.13.0. We expect that the SDKs will be updated to support the scheduled transaction feature, which is already available on PreviewNet now by this Friday. So that if you're using Java, JavaScript, or Golang, you can try that feature out for yourself. And again, for any of these features, we'd love any feedback that you can provide. Now, one of the areas we wanted to share a bit of an update on our documentation was around a unique feature to Hedera that's specifically valuable for our Hedera token service. And that's the ability to have atomic swaps of multiple token types, including HBAR, between multiple accounts. Said another way, rather than needing to program a smart contract, you can have a single transaction signed by multiple parties to swap tokens instantaneously. So you have a truly decentralized, custody-less ability to swap tokens with one another. So with that, I'll pass it over to Simi, who's going to share a bit more about our documentation to showcase that feature. Simi?
Thanks, Donald, for the intro. I'm just going to go ahead and share what we have up on our doc site that was recently added, which is samples on atomic swaps, as Donald had mentioned. So atomic swaps, as you may all know, is swapping tokens between two accounts without going through a third party like an exchange. And so what you can do with Hedera is swap tokens between HBAR and another token that was created with the Hedera token service, or just swap any two types of tokens created with the Hedera token service without having to go through an exchange. So each of these samples actually goes through both examples. One just transferring, for example, here, 10 HBAR for one token of another type. And then the below example is two different tokens created using the Hedera token service and swapping both of those tokens in a single transaction. And so that's actually as easy as it is to do atomic swaps with Hedera. And you can find this sample within the token service section on the doc site. And I'll go ahead and pass it over to Ken to talk about our Hedera improvement proposal process.
Thanks, Simi. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. And of course, I would be in dark mode because why not? But hopefully everybody can see this. So I'm really excited to share with you guys the Hedera improvement proposal process. If there's something I can stress, it's that everybody can participate in HIPs. And there's two things that I'm going to point everybody at initially for you to get familiar with them. The first one is the very first HIP, which is HIP 1, which documents the process itself. And you can find that if you go into GitHub and you go to the Hashgraph organization and you find the Hedera improvement proposal repository. When you come to this repository, you will have the README here, and up top, the HIP folder, and in here you'll see a list of HIPs, one of which we'll go through here in just a second. And then you'll find HIP 1. And HIP 1 is really what documents this process. So the goal with Hedera improvement proposals is not just for the community, but for internal to start documenting any problems or potential improvements that we found in the ecosystem. There are different types of HIPs, and I'm not going to go through this whole document, but I just want to highlight a few points here. There are standards track HIPs, which usually result in code being written. And there's core HIPs, service HIPs, services being things like the token service and the consensus service. API HIPs, if you wanted to make a change to the interfaces of Hedera. Mirror node HIPs. Application HIPs, which is what a lot of HIPs are going to be. This is basically someone proposing a standard of how to accomplish some use case at the application level. And so those are the standards track HIPs. And then there are informational HIPs and process HIPs. And this particular HIP, the HIP 1 itself, is a process HIP. You can see that here. So I'm not going to go through the whole document. I'd encourage everybody to go ahead and read through it. But the two things I want to point out is when you get started, go ahead and come to HIP 1 and familiarize yourself with how the HIP process works. I will say that whoever drafts the HIP is the author, and it is that author's responsibility to drive consensus and ultimately get a reference implementation built. Now, whether the author themselves actually does the specification documentation or the coding, they may partner with other parties in the community to accomplish that. But the goal for the author is to get this HIP to a complete status, where as a community, we can come to consensus and do kind of a last call for comments. And once we've passed that with no dissent, we would change the status from draft into final. And at that point, it is officially a standard in the Hedera ecosystem. So this is the first document I'm going to point you to, the hip1.md. The second place I want to point you to is discussions. And like I said, there's something for everybody to do in here. So if we look at the discussions, we've got this README, which is the very first thing, the very first post that you're going to want to read. But I'm just going to skip down here. If we look at categories, edits is where we're editing HIPs. This is basically once a HIP has been merged into our repository and assigned a HIP number, it now moves into the edits category, where you can come in and make your comments. You'll see here, if we go to the HIP1 thread, I started the discussion as kind of the core or the root of the thread of discussion around HIP1. And then I proposed something, and then we had some discussion about it. And this is how you would edit your HIPs while they are in draft mode in preparation for reaching consensus. So this is the model for reaching consensus. At some point in here, I'm going to make a call for final comments. And if there are no dissenting comments and we feel that the HIP itself is well defined enough, it will move into final status. So this is where you build that consensus. So you write the HIP as a document, and then in discussions, in this case, once it's been assigned a number, it goes into the edits category, and then we have that consensus discussion here. Another place you can go to is once something has become a standard, you can go into the Q&A, which we don't have any standards yet, so nothing's been finalized. And this is where you'd have questions and answers around standards that have been finalized. Ideas, this is kind of the pre-HIP place to have a discussion. As a matter of fact, this should not be under ideas anymore. This should be strictly under edits because it has a HIP number. But this is what I'm getting at, is there's something for everybody to do here. If you have feedback or industry experience and maybe you're non-technical, but you understand how the business works and you've got some insight into a problem that we're trying to solve, you can come either into the edits and contribute your perspective and your feedback into HIPs that have been assigned to HIP numbers. Or if you think that you're kind of early in your idea of what could be a HIP, you could come into the idea section and kind of pitch it to the community and say, hey guys, I have this idea of something that could become a HIP. What do you think? So we want to define the problem and maybe a high level initial draft answer in these ideas. And then once you kind of have fleshed it out a little bit, then you can convert that into a HIP. So there's plenty of space for everybody to get involved. I would encourage everybody to go through the existing HIPs here and review the documents. You'll notice that, and I'm gonna hand this off to Sam because this is his HIP, but HIP 10, so this started off as an idea, so you can have kind of like the initial draft right here, and then we have a number of comments that we see here, and then eventually, if we go all the way down to the bottom, actually I don't have it in here. Oh, here we go. So HIP 10 right here. So we have the link to HIP 10. So there should always be the link in the discussion thread. But this is where you could have that discussion around HIP 10, which is talking about a format for NFTs, non-fungible tokens, in a JSON schema. So that being said, I'm going to go ahead and pass this over to Sam, and then I'm going to jump into HIP 10 for him to review that with us. And Sam, feel free just to tell me to scroll down when you're ready.
Great, thank you. Hi everyone, I'm Sam Wood, CTO of Luther Systems. So we are primarily in the enterprise blockchain space and have a platform for automating business processes that cross multiple teams and groups and company boundaries. And as part of that, our platform builds on top of Hedera Consensus Service. And recently, we've worked closely with the Hedera team on connectors into the Hedera token service. And really, our goal is to make the usage of these new technologies as seamless as possible for developers so that they can focus on their business logic and not have to worry about the low-level details of these new exciting technologies. And so towards that, as part of our work, particularly in the Toko project, we have been doing a lot of development on top of the Hedera token service. And as the community has seen, there's been a huge interest in NFTs, kind of more just broadly, globally around the world. And I think a key part of that excitement and interest is really bringing to life the tokens through things like images and videos and metadata. And we've seen this particularly on, for example, the Ethereum blockchain, where there's a set of application level standards for annotating tokens with metadata, including images and videos and textual descriptions. And so standards like ERC 721, 1155 have been widely adopted both at the wallets, the exchanges, as well as the token explorers in that community. And we're very excited to leverage Hedera token service for all the great efficiency and performance benefits that it has. And towards that, we propose this application HIP to allow, in the same way as you've seen in some of these other permissionless blockchains, the ability to associate token metadata in a standard format so that the exchanges, the wallets, as well as the token explorers can visualize and show and bring these tokens to life, and so that the end users who are trading these tokens and purchasing these tokens can actually, in a standard way, view the images and that data associated with the token. So towards that, we in this HIP, there's been a few different iterations through the discussion. Definitely encourage the community to take a look at this and provide their feedback. We're still at the early stages of this, and what we've done here, going into a little more of the details of how this works, is we're using the new memo field on the Hedera tokens. So this isn't the transaction memo field. This is actually a separate attribute that called memo that's on the token itself. And in that memo attribute, this standard is saying that the token may include a URI that points to a JSON object that's stored on some other some other place, including the Hedera file service, maybe IPFS, maybe it's a URL just serving the JSON over a standard HTTP endpoint. So that URI it's pretty flexible, can point to a bunch of different things. But the file that's served at that URI is a JSON object that conforms to this token metadata schema. Now, originally in the early stages and early discussions of this HIP, we were focused on just NFTs. But after some good feedback and discussion from the community, we realized that really there's no reason to make this super specific to NFTs. That really more broadly, this can represent metadata for both NFTs and fungible tokens and any types of tokens on HTS. And so we've sort of expanded the scope of this, if you will. So it's not just NFTs. This is more of a general standard for attaching metadata to your tokens. And so this is the JSON schema that the JSON at the endpoint specified in the token memo field would serve. And so there's some standard fields. This schema itself is very similar to other JSON schemas that existing token explorers work for other blockchains. So there's fields like the name, the decimal, description, and then probably the most exciting one is the image. And so this would be a URI pointing to a separate resource that is an image conforming to a certain height and width dimensions and format, which you can see in the specification. So there's some guidance here about exactly the height and width, the aspect ratio, and this is important because imagine there's in your ecosystem of wallets, you want to be able to have many different wallets, suppose on your phone, be able to look up and quickly load these image assets associated with that token. And so these standards are really so that the community can agree on a common way at the application layer for storing and representing this asset metadata. So going down, also as part of this, I want to call out there's a localization attribute, and this also is especially important, as we can see even on this call, the global reach of Hedera and of these technologies. It's important that you can provide additional localized descriptions of the data. And so that's what this field here, this localization field here, is, so that you, as a token creator, you can do different translations for different locales associated with your token. So I think high level, that's what this standard hopes to accomplish, is provide a common way at the application layer for the wallets, the exchanges, to be able to load and visualize this asset metadata. So I hope to get some good feedback from the community and discuss this some more. And we're now starting to work on a reference implementation to show what this would look like for tokens deployed on the testnet.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sam. Anything you want to see us improve on, and how we can better support you in the HIP process as a Hedera team? I always want to make sure that we're open to that feedback, and making sure the community is aware of it as well.
Not at this time. I think the move to discussions was a great idea. I think that's the right forum for brainstorming ideas in GitHub. And just, I think, continuing to spread the message, because this standard is only useful if we can get all the players in the ecosystem to actually adopt it and use it. And I do think this is critical for tokens, to be able to come to life, so to speak, to the community. So just spreading the word and getting input from the different stakeholders, so that we can push this forward and start displaying some cool images for our tokens.
Absolutely. It feels like another token issuance use case or NFT use case comes across our radar every day. So we're certainly excited about this HIP. Maybe I'll just kind of address a few of the questions that have been coming in through Q&A that we've answered. First, there was a question which is about whether we'll incorporate the HIP process as part of our roadmap. We absolutely want to be moving towards that openness of both the ideation, design, all the way to implementation of our Hedera roadmap. So those items you see further down the line, we really do hope to have HIPs created by either ourselves or community members who are influential in forming and designing those roadmap items. Frankly, if you see a roadmap item, feel free to create a HIP on it if you are opinionated on how that could be best implemented or designed. And our hope is that we'll have more and more of the discussion in that forum for those roadmap items. We'll see that, frankly, as good validation for what we should build, but also how we should build it, as well as surfacing some of those breaking changes that might surface with new HIP items. We might not go and do that retroactively for things that are already in the implementation phase, but it's something we absolutely want to use going forward, and will help inform how we report our roadmap to the council and get their direction and approval as well. I think there was also a question about staking. That is still another one of our roadmap items. So again, we would hope to have a HIP on it in the future. But like I said, if it's something you feel opinionated about, feel free to start that process as a community, and we will absolutely use that as a forum for discussion, or create a staking HIP as soon as we can ourselves as well. Let me see if there's any other questions as well. Yeah, I think I'll just make sure to reiterate, you can see some of the activity, not only in the HIP repo, where we have both the HIPs themselves, the process, as well as that discussions feature, but also in our Discord channel where there's a Hedera improvement proposals channel, which we'll primarily use to, prod people to review and provide input when possible, and hopefully continue to expand our developer community and those participating in that discussion. So with that, I not seen any other questions. Brady, maybe I'll pass it back to you as we start to wrap things up.
Thanks, Donald, and thanks, Sam, for sharing that example HIP with us. Not seeing a lot of questions in the Q&A. Yeah, nothing's come through. If anyone does have questions about anything that was presented today or anything else that's developer related, happy to jump into that.
I saw one question about staking versus mining. Mining is really just a legacy concept of proof of work. We are hoping to have a roadmap towards decentralization of node operation, but it's quite different than proof of work mining. There was also a question about exchange integrations. Much of that is surfaced on our Hedera.com website, both in our HBAR page and users page, as new products and services are adding support for HBAR and Hedera in general.
There's a question about exchange integration. So Hedera actually doesn't control which exchanges or which wallet providers list HBARs. So, those will continue to happen over time as adoption increases.
I see a question that came through in the chat section about the difference between NFTs and FTs. For those who aren't familiar, an NFT is a non-fungible token and an FT is a fungible token. Traditionally, the distinction is whether there is a single unique item represented by that token versus whether something is interchangeable or fungible. So for instance, a trading card would be non-fungible, whereas perhaps a rewards point for a credit card would be fungible. One of the unique features of the Hedera token service is that you can have each individual token type be unique with its associated properties, like what might be standardized with Sam's HIP 10. But you can also easily change from a single instance of that token to multiple. So you could have, for instance, a fractionalized ownership of a unique piece of artwork where each token supply represents an ownership share in that art. Or you could have maybe a digital sword used in a video game, and there's a million instances of that unique sword. And so if anybody has one of that million supply, that they have the sword or an instance of the sword which has certain properties for the game. On the fungible token side, we see things from loyalty and rewards points to central bank digital currencies and stablecoins. So it's really a fascinating space as well. Sam, I'd certainly be curious what you all see on that distinction or how you all think about it as well.
Yeah, I think as you said, the classic NFT example would be like a piece of artwork. But now what we're starting to see is instead of having a piece of artwork belong to just a single investor, we are starting to see the fractionalization where you may have a piece of artwork that has investment from a whole group of individuals. We're also seeing a fractionalization in real estate and property. So and this would use the fungible token feature, which where you have a pool of investors investing some smaller amount than a traditional property investment to invest in something like a new office building or a hotel, for example. But no, I think that generally that's what we're seeing. There is sort of a blend more and more where you're starting to see things sort of in between fungible tokens and non-fungible tokens. But I would say those are the two kind of the classic examples. One of a fungible token, as you said, like a central bank digital currency is a great example. Maybe HBAR is another example, and then artwork as an NFT. I think that's the simplest way I like to think of it.
Question for you, Sam, from myself on that. In terms of, you showed listing a URI for an icon. How does that compare to how someone might list those attributes with a token that's created using a smart contract, or is it very similar?
It's very similar. So we found, what we've seen is that JSON schema has been successfully used in a lot of existing wallets for in kind of the broader public blockchain ecosystem. And so I think it does a good job of capturing the core attributes, and it might, by using a standard that's very similar, I think it will make the integration even easier with more wallet providers and exchanges and token explorers. And it seems to have served the community fairly well so far. So it's very similar to the 1155, which itself is an expansion of ERC 721 with just a few more fields, particularly the localization, which is very important for the global community.
Yeah, the localization feature I thought was really unique and interesting. One more question too for myself on that. Sometimes we're starting to see NFTs in games like Fortnite, where there are certain attributes that allow the player to perform specific functions. If it's a shield, for example, it lists like the power of that shield for its defense against another player. Is that something that can also be included as part of these attributes in an NFT that's issued on Hedera?
Yeah, definitely. So there's a field, a description field, where I think would be a good place to describe those attributes, as well as if it's more structured, there's a properties field, which is more of just a bag of string key values, as well as numbers and arrays values. And that would be more appropriate for, like structured attributes of the sword in your video game example. And properties was another suggestion from the community also. So I think between the description and the properties fields, you could represent kind of unstructured and as well as kind of more structured attributes for the token.
Cool.
There was another question as well about atomic swaps, specifically if those can be built on Hedera. So the atomic swap feature is unique to the Hedera token service. So either a token on the Hedera token service or with HBAR is how you could leverage that feature. It doesn't support assets on other chains because they don't have that unique property that allows high performance, decentralized control, and native multisig. But there are community projects supporting the exchange of tokens across bridges between Hedera and other networks.
So if there's no other questions, I think we can get things wrapped up here. This session was recorded and we'll be sending it back out to everybody to be able to listen to or share. And appreciate everybody joining. Appreciate you, Sam, for joining us as well and sharing a little bit about the HIP that you've created. One more question that came through from Drew. Could that eliminate the need for exchanges in the future? I think that's referring to the atomic swap feature, Donald.
I think one of the priorities we have as a decentralized platform is, we provide a core set of features and utility through those features, but how they get used, whether they're for exchanges, centralized or not, is wholly independent of Hedera. So I don't want to, project about how they might be used, and we're eager to see all the different ways the community can build on top of them.